business in terms of how you can systemize it? The answer is, of course you have, because that's what you do. But actually, when I talked to Alexis Kingsbury in this call that was coming up, we had such a conversation about how when he started in his first business, Spider Gap, he realized there were a couple of things missing, one of which was purpose, the other was processes. He went on and developed that in this business, Spider Gap. And then people asked him, how did you do that? Could you do it for me? And that enabled him to create his second business, Air Manual. And Air Manual is about processes, but it does it in a different way. It helps you reduce the time it takes to run your business. And guess what? It gives you your life back. It helps you run your business from a distance, helps you make it work better. I love this conversation because it goes back to some of my roots about how do you make businesses work smarter? How do I enable entrepreneurs to really step up and do things differently? So as you listen to this call, and we mentioned this at the end, think about what you can take away from it. What are your key learnings? What do you need to take away? And more importantly, what action can you take? One of which might be talking to Alexis about how Air Manual could support your business, or how Spider Gap could help you do 360 analysis. But either way, I think you'll find this conversation fascinating. I did, and I'm looking forward to the next one, which we're probably going to record in March later. So enjoy the show. Welcome, Alexis Kingsbury. Hello, and welcome to the Sparks by Ignium podcast. I'm Phil Rose, your host. And as ever, I'm delighted to welcome a new guest to the Sparks by Ignium podcast. Today, I'm joined by Alexis Kingsbury. Alexis and I had a conversation earlier this year about how he has built and grown and also rescaled a business based on his failure to do it the first time. And we're going to explore some of those views on what got him to where he was and what he's done differently to help this next business grow. Alex is actually a serial entrepreneur. He's got a number of businesses up his sleeve. And I was delighted to talk to him because actually he talks about processes and how processes can build a business where people often fail. And I think that's one of the key things that I want to pick out of this interview is what is it that Alexis has put into his current businesses and why do other businesses buy from him? Because what he does, what he has, helps businesses run smoother. And actually, at the end of the day, he makes management easy. So Alexis, welcome to the Sparks by Ignium podcast.
It's great to be here. Thank you very much, Phil.
Thank you. No, I'm delighted. I mentioned that serial entrepreneur. Every entrepreneur starts a journey at some point. So I'd love to just, where did you start off in life in that entrepreneurship world and what came before it?
Yeah, so it's hard for me to pinpoint the exact moment, but I remember being probably 11, 12, 13 years old when I was first wanting to start a business in some form. And I always just liked the idea of building things. And so initially it was creating and selling newsletters and washing cars, sweeping drives. When I got a bit older, it was then selling headsets and building computers and providing IT support and so on. And even while I was studying management science at university, all really with the aim of building something bigger than me. And over I failed. And I think a big part of it was that every time things started to go well, I would get busy and unable to scale the business beyond just me. Yeah. And it's hard to put my finger on exactly why at that time I didn't realize that I should have been involving other people. But I didn't and couldn't work out what I needed to do to scale. And so I actually assumed that it was the business model each time. And so I'd set up another business after another business after another business. In retrospect, I think almost any of them could have worked and grown beyond me, but I didn't have the skills and knowledge and so on. Yeah. So I then instead decided I'd become a management consultant where I learned how really large businesses work at scale, because I was working with companies like Honda and BP and AstraZeneca and UK government and all these amazing companies. And I could see that the way that they were delivering at scale was through people and processes. And so realizing that and developing skills in process consulting and management consulting as I did there was really what gave me a much better foundation when I then left to set up the businesses that I still own today.
Okay, it's interesting. And you said there about people and processes, because I think that's one of the key things that we all see. You know, we often see entrepreneurs trying to do it, and the key bit you said there is, you know, you recognize what it was because you were getting busy and you realize you couldn't scale because you were trying to do it all on your own or through other people. And when we were talking before, you were telling me about a story about a salesperson you brought in and how that salesperson didn't work out for various reasons. I wonder if you can just talk about that, because I think this is a problem that a lot of entrepreneurs face, and we see a lot of one person businesses
Mm.
out there where they get to a certain scale and then they scale back, and that scale is typically around about £80,000 turnover, and then they hit a ball and they come back again. I wonder, what was it for you about that salesperson that gave you some insight into your management style and what you need to do about it?
Yeah, and I think you're right that a lot of business owners kind of get to that point where you're unable to grow the revenue line beyond you, and you're just busy. And I think sometimes it requires a bit of courage and encouragement and so on. But eventually, most entrepreneurs then go, right, I'm going to do it. I'm going to hire someone, whether it's part-time, full-timer, contractor, whatever. And I think the vast majority, I'd probably argue it's rounded to 100% of entrepreneurs, the first time that they hire or contract or whatever it is, it doesn't go well. And unfortunately, the vast majority take that experience, that getting burned, and decide, okay, I'm not going to do that again.
Yeah.
And I think that's a shame, because it leads to some of the self-talk like, oh, this particular activity, that has to be me. That can't be done by someone else. Or, oh, it would just be better. It'll be done better, or how I want it to be, or faster if I just do it myself. Or it'll take longer to train someone than it would to do it myself. And I think those are common things that we've probably all said to ourselves at various points. And the problem is that sometimes there's a little bit of truth in it. And I think what you have to do is go, but it doesn't have to be the way. There, if someone else bought the business from you, like Elon Musk, how many of the activities that you're doing that you think have to be you, do you think he would be doing day to day? And I think as soon as you kind of realize that and realize there has to be a better way than this, you start looking for it. And you can, there are, as we've discovered, there is definitely a much better way of doing it. Before we found this approach, we definitely didn't get it right. And as you mentioned, there was an example of the very first salesperson I hired where we knew that we wanted to bring someone in. We were terrified of getting it wrong. So we decided, right, we'll bring someone in experienced who knows sales, that can do better than I can at sales, because I was doing all the sales in our first software business, but that wasn't my background. My background was being a consultant. So I figured, well, I don't know what I'm doing, but someone else will. And so we had a lot of candidates to choose from, but chose eventually someone who had done £1 million in revenue in the previous year, and in a similar space. And so we thought, this is fantastic. With Spider Gap, our 360-degree feedback tool, will accelerate and become, this really well-known tool in the industry, and will achieve all of our goals if we just let this person, this experienced salesperson, run at it and deliver. And so we gave some kind of high-level guidance and information about the product and all those sorts of things, but then said, right, over to you. And we waited weeks and then months and realized not only were they not going to achieve £1 million of revenue, but they weren't even going to hit what I'd been hitting, and I hadn't even been able to do it full time. Well, and that was really painful, because it was frustrating, and because it's not just that specific test, it's the feeling of, oh, our dreams aren't going to be achieved and we can't see another way through this. There wasn't a plan B. This was the best talent we could get in terms of sales. And so there's a question at the time, there was then a question of, is this business doomed to fail if this great salesperson can't do it? And so that was really, really painful. And the stress of the financial impact and the time and so on meant that, that really nearly broke myself and my co-founder at the time. Right. It definitely impacted the relationships that we had with our significant others. And there was definitely times when we were thinking, do we need to throw in the towel completely? And sadly had to make redundancies to be able to even continue existing. So that was a classic, in many ways, bad experience of hiring, and not because of the almost cartoon like natures of hiring of I hired someone and they never turned up, or I hired someone and they stole all my clients, or I hired someone and they were just rubbish. We had done, in theory, a good job of hiring the person, and yet we just couldn't work out why the results weren't coming.
That's interesting. So what was behind that when you looked into it? What was behind the issue? If you thought you'd done it the good process, you'd got the right person in there, you've made sales in the past, this person had ability. So what was the thing that you identified, if you could find it, to say that was the problem that was existing with that one individual?
Yeah, I'd say that what it really came down to was, or how I identified the issue was that I looked at, well, hang on, what were the results that I was getting? And so
Yeah,
by doing comparison, I was able to see where in the essentially the process, if you like, or the time we didn't have it documented,
yeah.
where things were going wrong. And
Okay.
then when I started to get the salesperson to record their calls so that
Mm,
I could then listen back to them and so on, I realized that there were key things that I was doing on my sales calls and in my follow-up that this salesperson wasn't doing. And I identified, I think this is making the difference. Like, for example, not asking the right questions around what are the customer's goals and what have they tried in the past and those sorts of things,
basic
which
stuff. That's basic sales at the end of the day, isn't it? So
it,
that's interesting.
it is, and particularly now, I think there's more knowledge and guidance on it than there perhaps was 10 years ago when, in this particular case.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, but in some cases it was more nuanced. It was about making sure that you really dig into the why behind, they say, oh, we're interested in Spider Gap because we want to run 360 feedback. And
Mm,
I'd be digging into, what is it about 360 feedback? What goals is that supporting, rather than just going, oh, okay, great. And equally digging into okay, why didn't this tool work for you? And as a result, where does this fit? And so I think, and even then demoing the tool, I think that's probably another specific
yeah.
area that isn't sales 101, is how do you demonstrate the product that you're selling in a way that really lands with the benefits and or the goals that the client has. And
Mm,
so I think when I was looking at that and realizing, I didn't provide, like I could have just given this is how to do it.
mm,
And I could have given sales collateral and email templates and all those sorts of things. And even, pipeline management and whatever, but didn't, because I thought, oh, well, I'll give this person an experience thing. And that, I think I've learned that lesson a few times throughout my career as an entrepreneur, which is be very careful when you're delegating something that you haven't first proven. I think there's a temptation sometimes to delegate something that you don't like doing and isn't in a good shape. Like,
yeah.
let's say you're an entrepreneur that really hasn't cracked sales, maybe you haven't really made sales. And so then you think, oh, well, I'll bring in the salesperson, you delegate it, but you're not even able to identify what's going wrong. And I think that was still the case for me. Like, even though I'm saying, oh, I was reviewing the cause, my sales performance hadn't been good enough to be able to really draw those conclusions anyway. So I think that's one of the things you have to do is first work out what works, and then make sure that you document and delegate that, rather than make the mistake of either delegating a problem, which means you've just got a problem that's now harder to solve because it's further away from you, or solving the problem but then not effectively handling over the solution over to someone else. So I think that was really what we learned. And the good news is that then on the next hire, which this time we then hired part-time because we were so scared of making the same mistake and so on, we then did provide the collateral and the process and so on. And we got the results, and it was amazing.
And interesting actually, because when we talk on this podcast, we often talk about businesses and purpose. Helping those businesses who understand what purpose means, understand that purpose really does drive two things. It drives longer term prosperity. It does good, but you know what it does? It really engages the people in the team. So I wonder, did the concept of purpose ever come into that early stage business as Spider Gap? Did you ever consider it? Or were you like most entrepreneurs who go into business, they just want to make it work and make money, and purpose goes out the window because they're just striving to survive?
I think in the early years, we didn't have that clarity. And it was really after that bad experience, with hiring that salesperson and so on, that when we then started to get detailed over what guidance and onboarding information do I need to give this new salesperson the second time round, one of the things became, well, actually, one of the things that's really different about the way in which I have my sales conversations is I'm passionate about why we're doing it. And that's one of our core values. It's our number one core value, is focus on impact.
Yeah. Okay.
And even defining those values was something that had to happen then at that time, because we were then saying, okay, we need to really onboard people into the organization, be clear on what our values, what our expectations, and so on. And so it was around then that we sort of defined them and included that.
Yeah.
And so when we then started to get clear on, okay, here's the purpose, here's what we care about. And in the case of Spider Gap, it was that we believe passionately about in personal development. Myself and my co-founder read many books on business and so on a year. I think at one point I was probably doing about one a week.
Okay.
And
Great.
and in our teams, we would always look for people who are also passionate about personal development. But we felt that not only is that good for business performance, but actually it's really good for your health and mental well-being. It supports a feeling of growth. It allows you to be regularly identifying and addressing your biggest problems and challenges, and that's really freeing. And so we really felt like that's something that we want other employees in organizations, big and small, to be able to do. And so that's where we saw 360 feedback as being able to sit in, is helping that process of prioritizing where do you need to focus your personal development, and then coming up with a plan to take action on that. And I think when you then embed that why and your purpose around, we're ultimately helping people be happier and have more fulfilling lives, that certainly helps a sales conversation, but it also attracts and engages a team around a bigger purpose than just, can we add another 6 figures to the revenue line?
I love that. And I love that, just the purpose, helping people be happy and have more fulfilling lives. What a great purpose. Who wouldn't want that? And I think that's great to hear that. But the key bit you put beyond that, I think, is that thing about the values and how values became important. So that one value, focus on impact, starts to drive thing. And I know one thing you mentioned before, you've got a number of businesses now, but you have a common set of values that runs for both those two businesses. This wasn't what we were going to talk about here, but I wonder how did you come up with those values? Because a lot of people struggle to come up with values in the first place, and especially in early stage businesses, where they're like, well, what's the point of values? We don't need that. We just do the work. But you and I know, and I look at you at the moment because you've still got Good to Great behind your book on your bookcase there, and it's a book that I recommend to everybody. And over the last 20 or so years since I first read it, to me, it's got a lot of great stuff in there. So I wonder, how did you elicit the values for your business in the first place?
Yeah, so I think the starting point for us, and I'm not saying, and I'll loop back to how I would recommend others do it, but the starting point for us was asking the people that we were working with at the time. So contractors, employees, etc., and saying, look, we want to define a set of values. What do you think we do value? And so I remember at that time that person saying things like, well, personal development, like you're always looking for opportunities to improve both ourselves, but the way in which we do things and so on. And so through iteration, that became our fourth core value, which is always look to improve.
Yeah, I love that.
One of the things that the people we work with mentioned was around attention to detail. We're really big on making sure that you do things right the first time, because we believe, yes, it takes longer initially, but actually in the long term, it saves time. And so we believe that, sort of smooth is fast rather than just moving fast and breaking things, which I believe was a value for Facebook for quite a long time.
That's interesting. Yeah.
And so those were core values that our team could just identify when we asked them, what do you think we care about? And I think that was really helpful.
Lovely.
I think then having iterative conversations where you kind of set out, okay, these are our values, and where you just try and apply them and use them in day to day in the business, and use them for recruiting people and use them for performance managing people. It becomes clear when you realize we're missing, like, there's a reason that this team member isn't quite fitting, or they're not quite performing, but I can't quite link it back to one of the values that we've defined. That's normally a good sign that you're missing something in your value set. And so, for example, for us, one of the ones that became clear was like, oh, it's focus on impact. We're really big on what's the why, and we want everyone in the business to understand the why behind what they're doing. And so, when we identified that maybe there's a team member that's doing things and is productive, but doesn't challenge and doesn't think behind it, we're thinking, oh, this doesn't feel right, and yet I can't quite put my finger on it. They're being proactive and dependable. They are always looking to improve. They are showing good attention to detail. What's the issue? It's like, oh, they're not linking it back to the overall why, so they're going down on a tangent. Oh, that's what it is. And so that's how we came up with ours, is that kind of iterative approach, and then got to a point where, you know, we review those essentially every 3-6 months. We, as part of reviewing our one-page strategic plan, as it would be called, by Scaling Up, or VTO from Traction, or whatever it is, like, by values is in there for us to just do a quick check and say, does that need to change? And in the early days it changed quite a few times, but it hasn't done for a long time now. And I think so it does have to be iterative.
I agree with that.
And I think the other but I think in terms of the common mistakes that people make when they're setting values, I think that often they set values that are more hygiene factors to be a business. They'll say things like, we are trustworthy, or we do what we say we'll do, and those sorts of things. And I think it's good, those are good things to have in your business, but if they don't set you apart from other businesses, then it's kind of meaningless having them there.
I think that's true. I think, I often talk about order winning criteria and qualifying criteria. And some of those initial things you talk about there, they're just qualifying. They just get you in the ring in the first place. But
and I think it does vary by industry. I think there are some industries where certain values are a differentiator that in other industries wouldn't be. So for example, we're innovative and always trying to stay ahead of the game. If you're working in an industry that is like high tech or high technology or R&D or whatever, that's a bit of a no-brainer. It's like, well, of course, that's like we're an innovation house or whatever. Whereas if you're working in an industry that tends to be pretty traditional, for example, in the education space or whatever, then you go, well, actually, that's pretty unusual, and is going to have some pretty big ramifications in terms of how you operate and who you attract and who's the right person. And I think that's the key, is to look at, for your industry, what are the things that set you apart from some of the other organizations in it. So I think it's a useful exercise. I remember on with Paddy, my co-founder, we discussed this on an episode of our podcast, De-Stress Your Business, in which we talked about specific values and like whether or not they, do they stack up in any situation. And one of them is like honesty, where it's like, well, isn't that always something that you would want to have in any business? And I think I argued that there are certain industries where maybe that isn't perceived as being the norm. And therefore maybe it does become a differentiator, but rarely.
I think that's interesting, isn't it? Because things that we just take for granted sometimes, and actually when they stick out there and you actually question them, and I think that's the thing about it, people don't question them. And the other bit I think that sits behind that, you talked earlier about understanding what sets you apart. Values, we all know that it's the behaviors behind it that really makes the difference. So when you talk about focus on impact, it's what does that look like? How do you catch someone doing it? And also, what's the negative of that as well? Because when you can say, okay, that's what good looks like, but hey, this is what bad looks like, this is what poor performance looks like, then you can be really clear about, okay, we can see what's happening in our business. And you mentioned about recruitment, when you're recruiting your salesperson right at the beginning, that person, they had a great capability on paper. I sold 1 million last year. But actually, do they buy into your value? Do they fit the mold? Can they demonstrate the behaviors that start driving what you want in your business? That's the key bit. That's where the rubber hits the road, in terms of this person is a good cultural fit for us, not just a performance fit for us.
100%. And I think, as you say, it is about how do those values impact how you actually operate? Because there's no point in just putting them on a PowerPoint slide or on a poster and sticking them on the wall and that's it. And I think there's a few big ways in which your values have to kind of permeate into the way you operate. I'd say one is how you recruit, and how you attract the right people. So I believe the values of your organization should be clearly explained in the job advert. I think that it's one of the first things that I think that they should be able to see when looking for that. It's not just about the role, it's about joining the company, and therefore that should be visible.
part of who you
So,
are.
and you want people to self-select on it, and then you want your recruitment process to assess against it throughout the various stages to make sure that the person really values and demonstrates those values, and in the past has demonstrated those values and really gets it. So I think that's one of the first areas. I think the second area is then in how you manage your people. I think that you alluded to a point there, which is catching people doing it.
Yeah.
And I think that's, you know, a big thing that we do is make sure that we catch people doing things right more than we're looking to catch people not doing it.
Yeah.
I think in terms of, you know, if you take a value like focus on impact, how does that show up? Well, it shows up when I talk to one of our team. For example, if we look at Air Manual, where it's all about helping businesses to document their processes and onboarding, and as a result, free up time, reduce mistakes, and so on. But if I'm talking to one of my consultants and they're saying, oh yeah, I'm really excited, we're doing this project where we're going to document their marketing processes, what I'm looking for is them explaining the why, because that's not the exciting thing for us, because we're focused on impact.
Yeah.
So what I'm looking for is, oh, I'm really excited to work on this project because we're going to document their marketing processes, which means that the business leader is no longer has to work weekends. Yeah. Right. Or means that their current marketing manager is able to go on holiday because they've not been on holiday for 3 years because they're worried about the business falling over if they do. Yeah. Right. It's those things. It's bringing out that why. And even on our like daily huddle calls, we encourage people to like share wins at the start of those calls. And we're not just looking for, oh yeah, I was really pleased with this piece of work I did. It's what's the impact of that result. And you can see that that permeates like everything you do, and you're essentially managing your people against that.
I love that. I love that. And what that does for me is, you know, when you're talking about that, is you're managing it through, you say, the recruitment and the attraction, but actually it becomes part of what you do as well. So you've got that embedded in the company. And you said that when you're catching people doing things right. And I think that's the key premise of it, making sure you're just monitoring it and then looking at that purpose piece. And I love that you said about, you know, helping people articulate what the why behind it as well. You know, why does the customer want this in their business? Taking time off and they've not done it is all about delegation because they feel comfortable doing that. But you're identifying that why. And at the end of the day, from a sales perspective, that's the thing that's going to sell it for people. But actually, when you're selling it to the people doing the implementation, that's a great thing because they're living their purpose effectively. When you come to that about, you know, helping people, I think that's the key. I love that story. And so tell me about your journey in that case. Because I think this journey, you know, when you talked there about what SpiderGap did originally, and you realized some issues there. But SpiderGap was not your first business, but it's not your last either. So what came after that, and how did you get into that next place?
Yeah, so as you say, you know, I've had a variety of business over the years. SpiderGap was the first business that really took off, and we were able to grow a team as a result of implementing some of the things we've talked about. But I guess the experience that we had over essentially what we've just talked about setting up the recruitment and the performance management and so on, and actually the third piece of where those values need to permeate is in your processes. It's the way in which you do the things you do. So, for example, a good example of the focus on impact is that it's common that customers might ask, oh, do you provide X or Y feature, or can I suggest that you do this, or it'd be good if you had this. Many businesses, and particularly tech businesses, they'll just get captured as oh yeah, they want this integration, or they want this, or want it to be blue or whatever, and that gets captured. But because of our focus on why, our focus on impact value, we would have it in our processes for the salesperson, for customer success, for the engineering team to first go back to what's the impact that this will have, so that we can prioritize it and so on. And so I think you need it as part of the processes. I like that. And so I guess when you bring everything we've talked about before, so my struggling with training and onboarding people, managing people, and then you bring the fact that we kind of overcame those things by essentially through processes, through establishing really good recruitment processes, onboarding processes, performance management processes for engineering, sales, everything. That was what we found really enabled us to scale the business, and not just grow it, but do so in a low stress way,
Yeah.
that freed us up from the business, to the point that myself and my co-founder are not required day to day or even week to week in Spider Gap. In fact, I took a 6-week road trip across France and Spain last summer. I was able to do that and not needing to work during that period because of having those things in place. So it's not just the benefit of being able to grow, but do that. And I think it was that experience that led us to start the subsequent software business, which is Air Manual, because we'd get asked by peers of mine, other entrepreneurs and business owners, how you do. I'm really interested in how you do your recruitment process and get over 1,000 candidates and process all of it, and how you've embedded your values as part of it, or how you onboard people so fast and all this sort of stuff. How do I do it? And what we'd realize is I can't give you a really easy answer, because we've had to put it together with sellotape and string. The tools that are out there were not fit for purpose. And even the approach that we took was not obvious or easy to communicate. And so really we decided we can do something here. And so we created Air Manual to provide a very easy to use, intuitive system for documenting processes and onboarding as interactive checklists. That means that it's easy for people to create the processes and take less time to document them than it's going to really free up in the next week or so. But also that they get used and maintained, because most business owners know that they're meant to document and delegate and hand this stuff over. All the best business books tell you, E-Myth and Clockwork and so on, like they tell you to do this stuff, but it's often not clear how to do that in an easy and sustainable way. How do you make sure that that after a year or two, it's not all gone out of date and the right mess and a pain to manage? And so we've been basically working on what is the approach, what is the process of creating this in your business, and then making Air Manual as a tool frictionless to support that, so that you don't have team members that go, oh, well, I would do that, but it takes so long to update, I didn't. I'll add it as a to-do list, and then they forget to do it or whatever. So that was kind of why we decided to do Air Manual. But speaking to that greater purpose, that's the mechanism through which we did it. But why help people do that? Why do we think it matters? And I think it's because yes, we free up hundreds of hours of time. Yes, we save tens of thousands of pounds through mistakes. Yes, we make onboarding 80% faster and reduce churn and reduce hiring costs and add 20% to your business value and so on. Fantastic. That's actually not our real goal. Our real goal is removing the stress from the business, making sure that you're able to take time off, making sure that your team are able to be looked after, and that you're able to avoid disrupting them if they have to take time out of the business because of bereavement or sickness or holiday or whatever, because that's life-changing stuff. And we sometimes talk about the ripple effect of what we're doing, because it's not even just the business leader. That, let's say that you've got a business leader who's working 7 days a week, really struggling in the business, and many of our customers start off in this position, right? 60-hour weeks, whatever it is, and they've got no mental space, no time space to be able to create a greater impact. By addressing that, by freeing up 15 hours plus per week, which is something that I run a webinar on how to free up 15 hours a week and remove the stress and so on. And it's once you know the approach, it's surprisingly simple, but it's the key bit is how life-changing that can be. Because if you take that business owner and suddenly they've got 15 hours back, firstly, they're less stressed, they're more nice to be around for their family, they're more likely to be building better relationships with their family. That means that those people are more likely to be positive with the other people that they meet. It means that entrepreneurs' children are more likely to have better relationships with their own children, and all these, like the cascade impact of supporting that is huge. But then also for the person's team, for that business leader's team, in terms of their ability to enjoy their work and what that means for their family. And then you've got the impact that that business can have on people. Like as entrepreneurs, most of us go into business, yes, wanting to build something, create a financial freedom or whatever, but often there's a bigger purpose. There's a thing that we really care about. And you can't have that impact if you're stressed and you haven't got any time. And so that's what we created Air Manual to do, really, at the heart of it, is to create that space so you can spend time on what matters most and have a greater impact.
And I love that in terms of that thing that's driven you to it, because actually what you found when you were looking at Spider Gap, there was some stress in there, the things you learned, but actually as a result of that, you created the processes in your business. Someone then said to you, can you come and help us? But you realize actually you needed to create a tool to do it. So there's something there about, enabling you personally to gain from it. And obviously using your own manual, you've made it work. So Air Manual now is doing what you do. And I love the fact you managed to take a 6-week road trip. And I was keen to talk about that, because I think from a business perspective, a lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of founders, they have a purpose above and beyond making money. And one of them is to spend with their family, possibly, or to do other things in the community or in society. And if they get stuck in their business where they can't do that, they're not releasing their true potential. And I think this is a big thing around, enabling you to remove that stress, but actually freeing up the time. I was interested in the freeing 15 hours a week, because when I looked on your website previously about that, that's the one thing that first popped up there. Come and join you on the webinar. And I think I'd recommend anyone to go and look at airmanual.co and actually see what's in there, because I think there's some great information that people could just learn, whether you use Air Manual or not, in terms of doing things. But I'd advise you to go and do it, because actually there's so much there. And I think that piece you mentioned it's life-changing when you get this right. And I think so that there's a lot of power into that. So we're coming towards the end of this here in that case, in terms of this journey. And you've talked about your creation of Spider Gap and how that morphed into Air Manual, but you can now run both businesses. You can take time off there. If you're looking back on this, when you were in your consulting business as a young consultant, eager to go out and change the world, what was it in there that enabled you to step out of that consulting business and say, I want to do it myself? Because, car washing and sweeping driveways as an 11-year-old, one thing, but actually stepping into that bigger picture world, it's a big step. What was the thing that promoted you or even pushed you to say, I'm going to do it myself?
Yeah, I think I seem to remember at the time there were people always around me that could just, I don't know why, but people always had this sense that I should just be going off and doing my own thing and doing my own business. So I did have colleagues around me that were just almost expecting that I would at some point. And I think I probably held back longer than I would have done or whatever. But I guess if I got clearer that I didn't need to come up with the amazing product idea. I think that was one of my concerns, and perhaps the mistake I'd made in my early entrepreneurial career was thinking that the idea was such an important thing, that having this amazing business idea was the key. And I think, you can illustrate that by just saying, can you make money by starting a coffee shop on a high street that already has a coffee shop? Of course you can. Of course you can. It's like, what's the amazing idea there? There isn't an amazing idea there at its heart. There are things that you can do to create an edge and do all these sorts of things. But running a successful business is way more than just having a great idea. Yeah. I think that what matters more, and the starting point that's a better one, is purpose. And in fact, I can illustrate that with a great example of my wonderful 7-year-old daughter said to me just a couple of days ago. She said, oh, Daddy, I think I should make and sell sandwiches. It's like, that sounds great. And she says, yeah, we'll get a folding table and we'll put it out and we'll make the sandwiches and then we'll take them in the boxes and we'll sell them. I said, fantastic. I thought, right, I've got to temper my coaching enthusiasm. So I said, who will we sell them to? Because I'm thinking it's about who and purpose and so on. She says, oh, just anyone. I said, right, anyone. So anyone, so if a child wants a sandwich, then we said, yep. And if a busy adult who is on their way to work, for them as well. What about a sort of perhaps an elderly hiker who wants, to choose the exact sandwich? And quite quickly, she sort of realizes, hang on, this is going to be a nightmare. Like, my plan was to make all the sandwiches before I come, and now I've got some customers who want it done in a particular way, and the children wanted the crust cut off, and so on. And so getting clearer on who you want to help and why You know, is it that you're there for the busy worker and you want to give them a really nice experience, because otherwise they're just going to end up with a bog standard sandwich, you know, from the local corner shop or pharmacy provider.
The garage on it,
Why do we buy sandwiches there? Because they're on a meal deal.
because they're there.
Yeah, exactly. And so, or is it that actually it's for the children, and you know, you want to provide a healthy alternative rather than they end up going to the McDonald's or whatever? Like, getting clear on the why behind it is way more powerful, and means that whatever the product needs to be for you to solve that problem and to really help people, you'll pivot. Whereas the mistake I made, and even in the early days of SpiderGap, we didn't start off SpiderGap as a 360 feedback tool. We had to pivot to get there. And that was 2 painful years until we finally worked out. And if we'd started off with purpose, we'd have got there so much faster. So I think that's the key, is getting clear on what do you really stand for? What do you care about? Because then when you start looking for people who also care about that, then you start to get onto a winner. It becomes much easier to build a team and to attract people to you and come up with the right product market fit.
I love that. I love it. And it's interesting actually, because Vern Harnish had just rewritten Scaling Up, the Mastering the Rockefeller Habits. It's come out as the 4th edition, and get the next one, exactly. Yeah, he now leads with the concept of purpose. So chapter 1 is all about purpose, and that's a big relief to me, because I've been working around purpose for the last 10 years with my coaching and with helping businesses understand what their intent was. So purpose to me is really powerful. And that thing for you, you've got purpose really nailed there in terms of, you know, your daughter wants to go and create a trestle table with the sandwiches and sell it to anyone. But actually being clear about what's your purpose, and then choosing your core market who fit in with that purpose as well, because that's the key thing that drives it for you. Because your daughter can go out and she can sell sandwiches to anybody, but she'll just become like the run-of-the-mill pharmacy that sells the sandwiches, being a bit of everything. But then again, that pharmacy has its purpose as well. It serves the purpose of those who want the £3 meal deal with the basic things, and they walk past it on the way to the station. It's easy. But actually, it really comes down to, you know, what do you stand for? Because some people want that, and some people want to go to the bespoke sandwich shop where they get their bespoke sandwich made and they can chat with the person behind the counter and talk about it. And it makes a real difference. And I think that's a really key thing there about what you stand for. But the key thing you mentioned as well is, if you had started with purpose, it would have been an easier journey. But not many entrepreneurs do that. So they get busy doing, and they create something, and then they get time to go look at purpose and say, this is what we're all about. And I have to say, on that journey, when people are starting off, you know, when you start on day one, there's a big excitement about setting up your own business. There's also a bit of frantic energy as well going around with it, because day 1, excitement. Day 2, I've got this big job list to do. Day 3, a bit of anxiety because I've got this big job list to do. And in that first stage, we're setting our business with a sense of hope that it's going to work. Hope based on where are we going. And I often say people are they've either got a cultural purpose or a monetary purpose. Most entrepreneurs, it's monetary. And at some stage on their journey, they then get to a point where they're either making more money than they wanted to or expected to, or they're changing the world. And things have to flip, because if they're making more money, they've then got to decide, I can go and change the world. Or if they're changing the world, they might then need to think about, how do I make more money? But it's then about, you know, how do I bring purpose in and balance purpose and prosperity? Because one of the big issues I see for clients that we work with is they get confused about what purpose is, and they think they need to make more money, but actually what they need to do is get clear on their purpose, which will help them change the world. And do you know what? They're going to make more money in the long run. But it takes time. It takes their evolution to go through that. And I think that's one of the key aspects of it.
Completely agree. I think that's so wise. And there's a couple of illustrations for that. One is it's actually quite hard to build a business where you're just where your main purpose and drive is money, particularly given that to fulfill that purpose, your ideal is to attract employees who are willing to accept the minimum amount of money so that you can maximize yours.
Yeah.
And then if they say, well, great, I'm willing to, you know, who will get paid least or will be willing to pay least? People who work for charities and things like that, because there's a greater purpose. And they ask the question, great, what's the greater purpose we want? And you go, make me money. Like, it's not an inspiring cause. And as a result, you end up having to do the opposite. So yeah, I think that you're actually more likely to make money and be successful if you have a greater purpose that people can really ride behind.
You know, I would be an advocate of this because this is what we do, but I totally agree with that. And I think, you know, what you've done in SpiderGap and what you're doing in Air Manual, it sounds to me that you've now established your purpose, you understand who your customer is. And the key bit there is about, enabling people to take that time off, enabling people to de-stress. Because just thinking about what that would do for the human being that you're working with, not just the business owner, it's the person who's going home and seeing the kids, the family, the dog, the wife, whatever it might be. That's the key bit. It's that bit about how business owner can really say, I've made it work, and getting time to do it. And to me, that's the powerful piece.
Yeah, I think 100%. And yet, as you say, it's not always the area that the business owner is drawn to sorting out first. Partly because sometimes it feels like the difficult thing, partly because it feels like not the fun thing. I can tell you that the conclusion of the conversation with my 7-year-old about setting up her sandwich business was she decided that when she got home, she was going to create her open and closed sign so that people knew when she was open and closed. And it just reminded me of how many entrepreneurs, business owners do you know that their starting point is, I'll create the business cards, or I'll create the website or whatever. And it's like, that's not where you need to start. You need to start by having conversations with the people you want to help and really understanding the problem that they've got and how they're currently solving it. And as a result, crafting your solution and working out how you're going to sell it before you decide, right, I now even know what my company should be called and what our tagline is and what should be on our website. Those things you don't know yet. And yet the most enjoyable thing is, you know what, I'll go onto that business card website and I'll create my logo and add it and so on. But you may as well get the crayons out.
and interesting, actually, I've got a book over on my bookcase there, which I've not read for many years, called Step Away from the Crayons. And I've not seen Phil Parr for many years, but actually he wrote that book around, that's not what it's about. Step away from those crayons in the first place. And I think, if I could go back and look at that, I think that's the key thing. When I set up my business, what did I do 15 years ago? I got my business cards done to start with. Should have gone around town talking to people, but that's the way we do things, I think, in some ways. So one thing you mentioned, you said that you read a lot. You're a big learner. When I think about the Rockefeller habits in scaling up as a checklist, one of the key things there is about the executive team is healthy and aligned. And one of the key elements of that is that the executive team and each member of it regularly engages in education, whatever that education means. You mentioned you read a book a week, or used to, whether you do or not still. That's an amazing effort. And I think if I look at some of the tools we use, we're part of a Better Book Club, which is part of scaling up, where people log their books and you can all talk about them, but actually it becomes a bit of a competition to see who's read more than others. But the point I want to get to is, of the books you've read, which would you say you would hold up and say, this is the one that's really helped me transform life or business more than anything else? Now, you've read a lot, so where would you go with that?
Yeah, and I'd say that it kind of changed over time. So I'd say that there are some seminal books that have made an absolute fundamental impact at key points in the journey. I'd say that Scaling Up and Traction were two books that I read around a similar time that were absolutely key for leveling up in terms of how we were organized as a business. And I think that really helped. I think that businesses like the books like The Effective Manager and Good to Great and The 1 Minute Manager have been really useful to me to understand how to manage people, and actually that you don't need to be this incredible people manager. You can, there are some really specific things that you can do to make managing easy. And so I'd say books around that. And then I think over time, it's really depended on what's been the problem. I think, whether it's looking at finances, in which case Profit First by Mike Michalowicz has been,
Motorbike Malik.
And so that approach has been really powerful in the business. But then there's been various books on marketing, customer success, and sales. So I think one of my favorites would be like The Go Giver by Bob Berg on sales. So it's hard. I can't pick one. Brian Tracy's Eat That Frog, for example. Like every time I think about a different aspect of my life and that I think I've made huge leaps on, there's typically a book behind it, which is probably a useful lesson in itself. I think the key is getting specific on what's the challenge that you've got right now. And I think that that's often the mistake that a lot of business owners make, is it's not about reading 100 books. It's about identifying the biggest obstacle in your way right now and overcoming that and getting the guidance. And, it might be the case that you need to read 3 books on that area to help you find the way through that. And I think that's probably what's been most useful for me.
Yeah, I like that answer. I love that, and I'm glad you said it, because most people say my favorite book is this, and I'm glad you said that, because there's a whole load of books there that if people haven't read those, I think there's some great books in the first place, just as that list there actually. So I said earlier we were coming to the end, and then we picked up the pace again. So I'm going to ask you one more question before we end, because I think there's another thing I've got in there, and the question is, what's next? What's next? Spider Gap, great business, that's doing well. You've got some great clients there. Air Manual, you and I haven't talked about the clients you've got there, but if you just look on your website, you've got some big names in there already as well. So what's next for Alexis Kingsbury in terms of entrepreneurial journey?
Yeah, I think for me, it's about spending time on the things I really, really enjoy. And I think that with Spider Gap, I had a great experience and grew the business and so on. And to some extent had to do every role in the business and document and delegate and hand over. I think with Air Manual, the way that we've been growing, I've had to do a little bit of that in the very early days, but then quite quickly we've been able to set up the team. And I think I think partly because it relates to our conversation on purpose. I've found that I really, really enjoy talking about this topic, not because I think I enjoy processes particularly. I think people think of me as a process detailed person. It's really funny, like the people that know me best know that I'm often not that detailed as a person versus plenty of others in our team. But it comes back to the focus on impact. It's I was attending a workshop that one of our consultants was running today, in which the business owner was working out with his exec team because we obviously talk about it, focus on impact, like what's the impact of this particular problem that we're looking to solve around sorting out his processes relating to customer service. And so the team were identifying, well, even just in people costs and time costs, it's hundreds of thousands of pounds. And then the business owner said, and actually we've got some big clients that are worth $500,000 each, and those are at risk based on our current customer service. Therefore, total, the problem that we're solving here easily becomes worth 7 figures plus. And what I loved is the moment when he said, but actually it's not even that for me. It's the mental health impact. It's the fact that we're all stressed. It's the chaos. It's the fact that I can't take time out of the business. And that's the same for the other people on this call. And that's what I love. What I love is standing in front of a group of people who I know are experiencing that day-to-day pain and being able to offer a route through. And it's why I love conversations like this and speaking at events and running workshops and webinars and doing the podcast, doing our De-Stress Your Business podcast and so on. I love all of that because I know the impact and the ripple effect that impact can have when you're talking about people's relationships and how they spend their time and how happy they are and all those sorts of things. That's what really matters.
And I love that, is that when you say as a coach in what we do, it's all about impact at the end of the day. We want to help people change their lives, because that's the key thing. I often talk about people come to us as business coaches wanting something, and often they say, I want to make my business more successful, or I've got a problem. What they go away thanking us for is giving them their life back. And I think that's the bit that does it for most people, when you get that and say, yeah, that's what we're here for. But nobody recognized that in the first place.
I love that. Yeah, I absolutely love that. And so in terms of what next, for me personally, it's getting more opportunities to speak at events and do TV, radio, all those sorts of things where I can get to talk about this, because I think that although there's been huge steps forward in people talking about things like mental health and stress and so on, I think that's great. I think that there isn't enough conversation about for businesses, and for business owners, but actually just businesses in general, where there are opportunities to reduce stress in the way in which they're run. Not necessarily, not through, oh yes, we should have well-being exercises where we make sure that people have massage and things like that. It's how do you change the way in which the business is run to make it less stressful. And so I think opportunities to speak about that and free up people's time, that's where I'm going to be what I'm going to be doing more of.
I love that. I love that. What an inspiring purpose at the end of the day. And you can do that because you've got a business that enable them to run themselves.
Yeah, indeed.
That's a great point. So look, when we started the podcast, you and I talked beforehand about doing 30 minutes episodes. We've talked for a lot longer here because the conversation's flowed, and I think it's great. We've talked about all sorts of things, about purpose, about de-stressing your business, about the processing, about the journey you've been on. So it's been a fascinating conversation. I think, if people want to go and look you up, I think, I said earlier, airmanual.co. But also you've got SpiderGap as well, SpiderGap 360 tool to help people understand each other a lot better as well. So I think there's something there. And then where would they find you directly? You mentioned about events and TV and radio. Where would they find Alexis Kingsbury?
Yeah, so I think alexiskingsbury.com is a great place to start, where you can connect with me on social media and learn more about things I'm doing and get information for kind of booking me for events and things. I think, as I say, people can connect with me on LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, etc., where you'd expect. People can email me at alexis.kingsbury@airmanual.co and connect that way. And also, I'd love to see people perhaps on our webinars, available at airmanual.co/webinars. And also love to get people's feedback on some things that we're doing, like the De-Stress Your Business podcast and this episode. It's always surprising to me that you get probably 1% or fewer of listeners to something like this that actually feel like, I can reach out and share, here is a key takeaway. And so I really encourage people to do that, because ultimately that's why we do it. And so that would be the greatest gift that someone give, is just sharing whether something was useful, what was a key takeaway, how they're applying it, is really, really nice to hear. So do reach out.
I always ask that at the end of the podcast, saying I can't hold people to account, but if you can let me know a key takeaway. No one's done it yet, but hey, if you're listening to this now, send me and Alexis your key takeaways from this, because actually the key thing is to do something with it. And actually what I'd also say is, what action are you going to take? Because a lot of people listen to this and they'll listen to it in the car with doing nothing with it. To me, there's some great tips in here that you can do something with straight away. So I'd urge you to go and do stuff if you're listening. So Alexis Kingsbury, thank you. It's been a great conversation. We said 2.5 hours. We've almost gone for an hour just talking. So I really appreciate it.
We can do another one. I'm totally up for it.
We'll come to another one. I think that's a great call in that case. So
no, I've really enjoyed it. Thank you very much, Phil.
Thank you very much. Thanks.